Look, I love watching fights. MMA's been great to me. It's given me a career, it's made me friendships, and it taught me to never, ever mess with the dude with cauliflower ears. But let's be honest, there are way too many UFC cards. And I don't know about you, but when it comes to slanging and banging, I, unlike your mom, prefer quality over quantity. Just kidding. There was a time where fans were getting Cain Velasquez versus Junior Dos Santos for the UFC heavyweight title on television. Now we've got Mackenzie Dern versus Angela Hill and Kai Kara France versus Amir Albazi headlining back-to-back fight nights. And that's not a slight on the fighters, at all. MMA fans are slogging through one of the weakest stretches of UFC events in recent memory. The cards are short on star power, lack depth, and reek of apathy. Fights are being plugged from one crippled card to another like patchwork. It hurts the viewers and fighters, all while UFC and parent company Endeavor continue to tout record profits. Let's break it down. The reasons for UFC's dip in quality are simple, but the ramifications are actually pretty complex. ESPN's 2019 acquisition of UFC's television rights was a boon for the promotion. UFC was guaranteed $150 million a year so long as they met ESPN's event quota, plus additional income for a certain number of pay-per-view buys. Combat sports have traditionally been a volatile business where revenue relied heavily on fan interest. A big headliner, think Muhammad Ali, Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather, equals big money. A lack of name value equates to a shortage of cash flow. The ESPN deal granted UFC guaranteed income, financial stability, and less dependence on fighters to attract a mainstream audience. Analysts have described the UFC as a monopsony. And very quick breakdown for those unfamiliar with the concept, a monopsony is where one firm is the sole purchaser of goods or services. So in this case, the UFC is buying up most of the quality MMA talent out there, versus a monopoly where one seller controls the supply of goods and services. CBS Sports and Morning Combat analyst Luke Thomas says that this monopsony that the UFC has, as well as their revenue streams, are prime motivators for the promotion's quantity over quality approach.
I watched UFC have to compete to kill off the IFL. I watched them have to compete to kill off Elite XC and Affliction. I watched them co-promote. I watched them get out there and just make
they bought
fights.
Strikeforce. They were like, that's our rival. We're going to buy them.
Right.
You know what I mean?
But like, I watched them compete on a certain level to win those battles, and they did. They're just not competing to me anymore.
Sure.
The business is so large and so entrenched, and the methods of revenue generation are so fixed that there's just nothing that can really challenge the market but for the Ali Act or a unionization.
Questioning the name value of headliners is not a slight on the quality of their talent. It isn't even necessarily a criticism of their marketability. That would require that the UFC actually marketed them. The promotion is no longer incentivized to market superstars to mainstream viewers. After all, that would give the fighters negotiating leverage. Now, a diehard fan may proclaim, "Who cares about casuals?" Fighters and their supporters should. UFC's biggest and most lucrative customer is the mainstream fan. These are the crowds who get behind fighters and boost their profiles, leading to better paychecks and outside opportunities. The Conor McGregors, Ronda Rouseys, and Nate Diaz's of the world do not happen without capturing the imagination of the mainstream fan.
Right now in this era, UFC does not have the financial motivation to have stars, to make crossover stars. What did they used to do 10 years ago? I'll tell you, because I was working at ESPN at the time, and I was the only combat sports person based in Bristol. If they got a surprise new champion, like when Chris Weidman beat Silva, they ran him into ESPN, Luke, like 3 times in like a 6-month span to try to get him on every show and do every interview. And they were in the business of building up fighters. You would get behind fighters. Now they not only are not in the business of building up fighters, and a lot of times they're in the business of publicly negotiating against your favorite fighters and telling you why your favorite fighter isn't as talented or valuable. So that's one thing.
This isn't the first time the UFC product has felt stagnant. Fortunately for the company, the breakthrough success of global stars Conor McGregor and Ronda Rousey remedied growing pains and propelled the promotion to new heights around 2015-2016. Now, was that a stroke of luck? Their own ability to promote themselves? Maybe the UFC did a great job in packaging them? Probably a combination of factors, really, but I don't know if that's possible again, or at least not very likely.
This is the second time during my fan/media life of MMA where I have seen a ton of complaints around oversaturation. And it happened around 2013, 2014 previously. And there were great concerns about the way the product was going because the Fight Night cards were getting worse and worse. Ratings were declining in certain ways anyway. The pay-per-view numbers had sort of come back to earth. They had a lot of injuries at the time. I bring this all up to say I have seen what happens when the UFC hits this spot. The last time I saw them do it, they had this massive reinvention by virtue of these other stars. But certainly Conor and Ronda really began to take off in a dramatic way, right in a way to challenge all of that oversaturation. New fans came in, and it just felt like all of those problems went away. Here we are again. Is something like that really possible? To your point, BC, I have some concerns because of the way that the business works, and they have taken out the star power volatility.
The increasingly rare times that UFC actually backs a fighter deserve scrutiny too. Let's take Colby Covington, for example. UFC President Dana White has remained steadfast that Covington will challenge for the UFC welterweight title despite other contenders having better meritocratic cases. Even champion Leon Edwards has brushed off Covington as an unworthy challenger. A short notice title eliminator between Bilal Muhammad and Gilbert Burns at UFC 288, two fighters arguably more deserving of the title fight, resulted in Burns being kind of kicked to the curb as an immediate contender, while Muhammad is still likely queued behind Covington. Covington's supporters will argue that he's the more marketable pay-per-view headliner. However, that might be an overstated claim. His second fight with Kamaru Usman reportedly sold an impressive 700,000, but that deviates from the norm. The exact numbers for UFC 272 Covington versus Masvidal aren't public knowledge, but we know that it sold less than the 400,000 buys achieved by 274 Oliveira versus Gaethje. Furthermore, Covington's ESPN headliner against Robbie Lawler was the worst drawing of the first 5 ESPN cards. I caught up with data and MMA analyst Jason Lieb, the mind behind MMA, to get a better understanding of what exactly the UFC sees in Colby and where there might be a misunderstanding about what draws in MMA.
What I believe is happening with the UFC is that their data understanding comes purely from volumes. Just the UFC is very keyed in on headlines instead of developing any sort of internal metric of interesting fighter performance compared to their marketability as a news figure, let's call them.
White proclaimed at a recent press conference that Power Slap was, quote, #1 in all of sports, including NBA, NHL, NFL, F1, WWE, and more put together. If you don't believe me, take a listen.
Unbelievable money-wise. It's been unbelievable as far as social media goes. We're #1 in all of sports. And when I say all of sports, if you take the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, F1, WWE, and who am I forgetting, and added them all together, their numbers don't compare to Slap's.
UFC's skewed perception of social media engagement and how that translates to event buys may be the crux of its overconfidence in both Covington and Power Slap.
What he'll do is he has one controversial thing to say, and he'll talk, and he talks about things, but then invariably he'll say one thing that every person has to do their little reaction to. And so it becomes this thing where he makes himself into a story and detracts from Gilbert, Bilal, sort of like a black hole of interest, because and then it almost becomes welterweight title contender says X. What is Colby's response? And now people are expecting it, and all it does is just drives up these views. It's called a network effect in psychology, where he becomes the story. And what I think that the UFC does is they kind of look at that and they say, he's going to sell, because you just got to do that again. And I think the issue, though, is that Colby's shtick works for content, but his fighting style is such that, my dad is a very casual MMA fan, and he'll see all these things. He'll get mad at Colby. He wants to see Masvidal beat him up, loves Masvidal. But then invariably what happens is my dad will tune out of the fight within the first 2 rounds because it's a reminder that Colby's fighting style is really not that fan-friendly.
This shaky understanding of data may explain other matchmaking decisions. Former UFC bantamweight champion Holly Holm will headline the aforementioned fight night card with Bueno Silva, despite having a fighting style that is generally unpalatable to the casual fan.
Holly Holm is famous because she knocked out Ronda Rousey, and they just keep thinking that it will be that she has some sort of name brand star power. But a lot of the issues I see are just them not recognizing that fighting style is just as important as drawing names. And in my opinion, what they do is they just look at it. They say, she knocked out Ronda Rousey. It's one of the most viral moments in UFC history. So she's a bankable star. And in actuality, her fighting style is just not conducive to the casual fan.
The good thing is that most of you guys don't understand social media and how it works.
There are only so many world titles to accommodate UFC's increased event schedule. One of the company's signature moves to promote an event is to attach a championship belt through hell or high water. Interim titles are power slapped onto fights regardless of how available the reigning champions are. The caveat there is that interim champions are paid more, so at least it benefits the fighters. In a bizarre move to sell UFC 291, headlined by lightweight contenders Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje, White reintroduced the BMF title. This was a ceremonial title presented by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson to the winner of Jorge Masvidal versus Nate Diaz at UFC 244.
Since Jorge Masvidal retired, the BMF title is back up for grabs. The main event will be 5 rounds between the number 2 and number 3 lightweights in the world.
The problem is that White previously insisted that the ceremonial championship was a one-off for the Masvidal-Diaz fight. Look, it's all in good fun, and I'm not here to rain on people's parade, but it's a rather lazy and uninspired coat of paint for a rematch of what many already consider to be the 2018 Fight of the Year. Also, technically speaking, Leon Edwards is the lineal BMF champion. UFC's matchmaking trend can also have significant consequences for fighter health and performance. Bilal was fasting for Ramadan when he agreed to fight Burns, the latter of whom was 2 weeks removed from fighting Masvidal. Dern vs. Hill and Ricky Simon vs. Song Yadong are 2 recent undercard fights that were hastily pushed back to fill main events. It seems like the UFC knows that these fights aren't main event worthy, otherwise they would have just booked them as a headliner to begin with, yet they're churned out to maximize output. These abrupt changes have a cascading effect. Dern and Hill both told me that the anxiety and mental toll of extending fight camps was a big problem for them. For Song and Simone, it impacted the delicate and potentially serious weight cutting process.
The hard part is cutting weight, So I almost done the cutting weight, but they say you need one more week after 1 more week to cut. Cut weight is hard for me.
When you get closer to the fight, you start tapering off of the hard workouts, and you start only fueling your body for what's really necessary, and depending on how much weight you have to lose, So adding that extra week, that means we had to add back in hard workouts when we were already tapering down. So we had to bring the calories back up, get in some more live workouts, and then we had to bring it back down again. So it was a little bit of a fluctuation.
The UFC has shown a willingness to promote fights even before contracts are finalized, if it behooves them to do so. The most recent example of this is White targeting and later announcing Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley for the UFC bantamweight title on August 19th. Sterling will be 3 months removed from a defense against Henry Cejudo, is struggling with his post-fight weight, needs MRIs and X-rays, all kinds of stuff.
Oh, it's very frustrating. What it is I bloat so bad after making that kind of a drastic weight cut. My body just holds on to everything. Like, I'm still pretty fit up top. My legs are okay, but my stomach and my legs and my face, they get pretty puffy. I was 177 pounds, and I'm like, man, I probably hit 180 and don't even know it. And it's not like it's good, healthy weight. It's just, I'm just big. But then once the water starts to flush out, I lose a little bit of the bloat. I get down to 170, 68, 65. But yeah, it is a little frustrating because I'm like, I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting to have a little bit more time to kind of enjoy it a little bit. And I do want to be active. That's why I asked for September, because I know October is back in Abu Dhabi. I would love to go visit Abu Dhabi. I'm not trying to fight there again, because it's just a lot of moving pieces that are involved in trying to compete overseas. It really is. And I would rather be able to enjoy my summer a little bit more, and my birthday, so it is what it is. And yeah, so it's a little frustrating, but
The fight announcement came as a complete surprise to Sterling's longtime striking coach, Ray Longo. Ray happened to be on the phone with me, totally by coincidence, doing an interview for this piece when White formally announced the fight. Longo said he had no knowledge of Sterling committing to the fight, and Alja later revealed that he had verbally agreed only on the condition that his body can heal.
I mean, who could possibly like that? I mean, I don't think that's right. I mean, I don't think, I don't like it. If that's what, I don't know what else to say. I mean, either both contracts are signed or they have to say, we're working on this. But to announce the fight, I think, it's a way of putting pressure on the fighters. Then it makes them look bad if they don't fight, and they never agreed to fight.
The UFC is a powerhouse corporation. There's no doubt about it, and far be it from me to tell them how to run their business. Truly, I am not. But their current business model and matchmaking philosophy are not conducive to the best experience for us, the fans, or the fighters. The cards are gutted, the fighters must repeatedly compromise for opportunities, and inspired storytelling has been replaced by a cookie-cutter, manufactured experience, from the sponsorships on the cage, to their shorts, to the way they book fights. And that's all for today's video. Guys, if you enjoyed this sort of content, please let me know in the comments section what other topics would you like a deep dive on. If you love interviews, I got a ton on this channel every week with fighters headlining pay-per-views and fight nights. Go give it some love. Thumbs up on the video if you can, subscribe and tap the bell if you'd like to see more content. All of that goes a long way to helping the channel grow. Now, after all of that negativity that I just hit you with, I hope that you enjoy the fights and we'll see you next time.